Let the day loosen its grip for a little while. Let the rooms around you grow softer at the edges, and let the noise that has followed you from morning into evening drift farther away, like a market sound fading behind a closed courtyard gate. Tonight, there is no task to solve and no race to win. There is only a story, and it begins in a city of worn stone, warm dust, narrow lanes, and lamps that seem brighter after sunset than they ever do in full day. It is a story of a boy who wanted more than the life that had been laid before him, though he could not yet have named exactly what that more might be. It is a story of hunger, but not only for food, a story of gold, but not mainly of wealth, a story of magic, but even more of the quiet cost that follows magic wherever it goes. If you like, you can imagine the city now as evening settles over it. Rooftops cooling after heat, faint smoke curling from cook fires, a pale moon climbing above domes and towers. Somewhere, a hand lowers a lantern onto a hook. Somewhere, a mother folds cloth for another day's labor. Somewhere, a boy looks up between two leaning walls and wonders whether the slice of sky above him is all the sky there is. This is where we begin, not in a palace, not in a hall of gold, but in a place where life has become so familiar in its smallness that even a single strange promise can feel like a door opening. The door need not fly wide. It can open slowly, on quiet hinges, while the night air moves through it. The city itself will guide us, the dust, the stone, the market cries fading one by one, the lamps kindling, the silence growing kindly as the story goes on. And somewhere inside that widening quiet, Aladdin is waiting. Not yet changed, not yet tested, only restless, as if something in him had begun to lean toward a future he could not yet see. Aladdin lived in the part of the city that received everything last. The best fruit passed beyond his street and into richer courtyards. The finer fabrics crossed overhead, on poles and donkeys, and disappeared toward houses with carved doors. Even sunlight seemed to arrive, changed by the time it reached the alley where he and his mother lived, filtered through hanging cloth and roof edges, and drifting dust until it settled in pale bands across uneven stone. Their room was small enough that a single lamp could reach nearly every wall, though what it reached was not much to admire. A narrow sleeping mat, a low wooden chest with one broken corner, a clay bowl or two, a patched blanket folded neatly by habit rather than comfort, and a door that had long ago stopped pretending to fit its frame. When the evening wind moved through the lane, it came inside as easily as a familiar guest, stirring the curtain and carrying in the mixed scent of coal smoke, river damp, frying onions, donkey sweat, old cedar, and spice. His mother worked wherever work appeared. One day she washed linen in another family's courtyard until her fingers wrinkled and stung. Another day she bent over torn sleeves or loosened hems by the light of a poor flame, squinting until her eyes watered. Some days she returned with a heel of bread wrapped in cloth or a bowl of lentils promised by a cook who had taken pity on her. Some days she returned with little more than exhaustion and a smile she used to protect her son from feeling the full shape of their circumstances. Aladdin saw more than she wished. He saw the care with which she portioned food. He saw how her hands had gone from strong to narrow. He saw how she would sometimes sit for a moment before speaking, as though speech itself cost effort at the end of a long day. He loved her with the fierce love of someone whose world has been held together by one other human being. Yet alongside that love lived another feeling, one he tried not to show too clearly. The alley felt too small for the life inside him. The city walls felt like the rim of a bowl placed over his future. When he worked, it was irregularly. When he wandered, it was with more imagination than direction. Some called him idle. Some called him foolish. Some said he was too ready to stare at passing processions or stand still for a traveling musician when others were bargaining, lifting, hauling, hurrying, surviving. But what looked like idleness was often only longing without a path. He felt there must be some scale of life, not yet visible from where he stood. Some room beyond the room, some road beyond the gate, something wider than the lane, and truer than the resignation that settled over so many around him, like dust on a shelf. At night, when the city softened and market voices fell away, that feeling grew clearer. Hunger might remain, but noise lessened. Lamps lit one by one. Distant music drifted from a wedding court or noble feast. Shadows stretched long and kind across the walls. In those hours, the city no longer seemed only crowded and tired. It seemed layered, secretive, full of passages and hidden courtyards and lives unfolding behind screens and stone. It was then that Aladdin would lift his eyes and imagine deserts beyond the gate. Caravans strung out under moonlight, cool halls where fountains spoke all night, libraries full of maps, gardens where no one hurried because there was no need, and chambers where a life might be chosen rather than merely endured. He did not know how to reach any of it. He only knew that some inward spark refused to accept that the slice of sky above his alley was meant to be enough. Because his life had taught him to notice small shifts, Aladdin noticed the stranger before the stranger spoke. It was late afternoon, one of those hot hours when the market seemed to sag under its own noise. Sellers called out without much conviction. Children ran slower through the lanes. Flies worried at baskets of dates. A copper pan flashed in the light, and then dulled again under dust. Aladdin had been standing near a spice merchant's stall, not truly working, not entirely idle, watching a ribbon of saffron being weighed against small silver coins, when he felt the sensation that comes when a gaze lands on you with intention. He looked up. The man stood apart from the ordinary motion of the crowd, not because he was still, but because he seemed composed by a different world. His robe was rich without being gaudy. Rings rested on his fingers, though not so many that they seemed anxious to be counted. His beard was shaped with care. His eyes were dark and attentive, the kind that suggested less warmth than calculation, though the smile he offered from across the lane was smooth enough to conceal that for a first moment. He did not look at stalls or prices. He looked at people, or rather, he had been looking at them until he found the one he wanted. Then he began to cross the market toward Aladdin. The boy's first thought was simple confusion. Men like this did not come into his part of the city for pleasure. They came for a purpose, and rarely a good one. Yet the stranger's voice, when it reached him, was mellow and measured, carrying the easy weight of someone accustomed to being heard. He spoke Aladdin's name before Aladdin had offered it. He asked whether his father had once been known by a certain name. He paused at the right places. He laid regret gently into his tone. He said brother, as though it were a word he had carried over mountains. He said family, as though it still had heat in it. By the time he claimed to be a long-absent uncle, returned from trade and distance and late repentance, Aladdin's suspicion had not vanished, but it had been forced to share the room with something else, the dangerous sweetness of being chosen. No one had searched for him before. No one had looked at him as though he were an answer. The stranger knew this without being told. He spoke not only to Aladdin's ear, but to the quiet ache he had harbored for years. He asked about his mother with a gravity that felt almost tender. He listened to short answers, as if each one mattered. He placed a careful hand on Aladdin's shoulder once, then withdrew it, as though he understood the value of restraint. When he came that evening to the small room and pressed gold into his mother's trembling hands, the moment seemed to flower beyond belief. She wept openly. She called blessings down upon his head. She spoke of the dead with reverence, of family with wonder, of providence with the exhausted gratitude of someone who had spent too long on the narrow ledge between hope and despair. Aladdin watched the lamplight move across the stranger's face and saw how perfectly the man knew when to soften his voice and when to lower his eyes. It was almost enough to quiet the faint unease that remained. Almost, but hope, once admitted into a poor room, is difficult to question. For several days the stranger returned. He never hurried. He never demanded too much too soon. He asked Aladdin to walk with him near the edge of the city, where the walls cast long evening shadows over the road. He spoke of distant ports and camel bells at dawn and snow on mountains so high a man might believe himself walking among clouds. He spoke of mistakes too, and years squandered, and how blood calls to blood in the end. Then, when the story had ripened and trust had been coaxed into place, he let another promise drift into the open air between them. Some people, he said, are born to remain where they began. Others can feel from the first that the life around them is only a narrow beginning. When he said this, he looked directly at Aladdin, and the boy felt as if some private thought had been spoken aloud. After that, the rest became easier. A favor, a journey, a thing long hidden, a place that would accept no greedy hand, only one still untouched by hardened ambition. It sounded impossible. It sounded flattering. It sounded like the first true hinge on which his future might turn. They left the city in a morning light so pale that even the walls behind them looked uncertain at the edges. Aladdin kept glancing back at first. The gate seemed smaller with every step, then flatter, then no more than a pale shape against the distance. Ahead, the land widened without kindness, yet also without concealment. It lay open under the sky, hard and bright and almost empty, broken only by scrub, stones, and the far shimmer that made the air itself look liquid. For a while, the stranger talked as he always had, unspooling fragments of trade routes and forgotten kingdoms, names of places that sounded like spells in Aladdin's mind. But as the city disappeared, the talk thinned. The land itself seemed to demand a different kind of attention. Footsteps grew louder. Wind made a dry sound over the earth. Once or twice a hawk wheeled so high above them that it looked no larger than an ink mark on silk. Aladdin felt excitement and caution moving side by side within him. The farther they went, the more clearly he sensed that he was crossing not just distance but category, leaving behind the known scale of daily life for something older and less forgiving. At last the stranger stopped in a place that looked, at first glance, like any other stretch of barren ground. No shrine marked it, no tree shaded it, no ruin rose from it. It was a patch of earth and stone, beneath a wide, indifferent sky. Yet the stranger's manner changed at once. He set down the small bundle he had carried. He drew a circle in the dust with the end of a staff. He spoke words too low and old for Aladdin to follow. The air altered. There was no other way to describe it. The land, which had seemed blank a breath before, began to feel full of listening. Heat wavered strangely. A tremor passed underfoot. Then the ground cracked along lines that had not been there and opened with a grinding, deliberate sound, revealing a dark shaft breathing cool air from below. It smelled of stone, stillness, and something else impossible to name, something like age made physical. Aladdin stepped back, his heart lifting hard against his ribs. The stranger did not touch him. He simply turned and looked with an expression that mixed command and satisfaction. He spoke quickly then, much more quickly than before. "Go down, retrieve an old lamp from within, touch nothing else. Bring it only to me." His voice sharpened around the last instruction. There it was again, that brief flash of something beneath the gracious surface. But the opening waited, and in waiting, it seemed to exert its own pull. Aladdin stood at the edge, peering down into a darkness that looked less empty than occupied. The shaft descended by crude footholds cut into stone. Above him the sky burned on, vast and unconcerned. Behind him the city was no longer visible. Below him lay what might have been a grave, or a secret, or a buried answer to the restlessness that had followed him through every narrow lane of his life. Fear spoke first, it said. The earth does not open for good reasons. It said you are a boy, not a hero from a storyteller's mouth. But another voice, older and softer, asked what if this is the moment for which every smaller dissatisfaction has been preparing you? The stranger said something about destiny then, and the word, though worn from overuse in many mouths, found a tender place inside Aladdin. He lowered himself into the shaft. Stone cooled beneath his palms. Dust loosened under his feet. With each step down, the circle of daylight above him shrank until it seemed no more than a coin held to the sun. The air pressed close, then widened. When his feet touched the ground, he found himself not in a cramped tunnel, but in a cavern so broad his first breath caught. Columns rose out of shadow. The walls held a faint inner glow. Jewels lay in stillness. Gold rested in silence. Strange vessels and carved stands and objects with no name in his world stood motionless as though waiting to see whether he could pass among them without forgetting his purpose. And there, on a low ledge, almost humble in its plainness, sat the lamp. Not bright, not ornate, not impressive beside the wealth around it. Only old, only dull, only somehow more certain than anything else in the cave. That certainty drew him. He moved carefully, repeating the stranger's warning to himself. And when at last he lifted the lamp, it felt heavier than it looked, cool in his hand, as though it held not fire but compressed night. Then the stranger's voice floated down, thinner but urgent. "Jewels too, my boy, bring a few." Aladdin stopped. The instruction broke against him oddly. He had been told not to touch anything else. Now the rule changed. His answer rose before he had fully shaped it. "First the lamp, then we will see." Silence followed when the stranger spoke again. The softness was gone. "Obey me, the cave, the treasure, the hidden earth, the long coaxing days in the city, everything tilted in a single moment." Aladdin saw the trap at last not as a hidden thing, but as something that had been visible all along beneath the pleasant voice. "No," he said. The word trembled but held. Then stone answered fury. Dust fell. The opening above began to close. Darkness did not fall all at once. It narrowed first, the way a lid lowers over a lamp, until only a ring of light remains. Aladdin lunged toward the shaft, one hand reaching up as if human fingers could hold back stone. He cried out, first in protest, then in raw appeal, then in anger. The face that appeared briefly above him was no uncle's face. It was pinched and cold with thwarted greed. "You are useless to me," the man said, and then the last segment of daylight vanished. The sound of stone sealing upon stone rolled through the cavern and went on echoing long after motion had ceased. When silence finally settled again, it felt different from the silence before. Before, the cave had been listening. Now it seemed to have accepted him into itself. Aladdin stood in blackness so complete, he could not at first tell whether his eyes were open. His own breathing sounded like someone else's. The lamp in his hand became the only definite thing in the world. Panic rose fast, not because he was a coward, but because he was young and buried beneath the earth, and had just watched trust transform into deliberate abandonment. He stumbled. One knee struck stone. The lamp slipped, clanged against the floor, and rolled a short distance away with a harshness that seemed almost obscene in the dark. Aladdin reached for it blindly and found only grit. Tears burned without permission. He swallowed them down and then failed to keep them down. They came anyway, less from self-pity than from the sudden collapse of everything he had allowed himself to imagine. The stranger had not only lied, he had placed Aladdin's deepest longing on the table and used it like bait. Family, future, destiny, escape, all of it had been a language for greed. In the darkness, that truth felt heavy enough to touch. After a time, or what might have been only several breaths stretched thin by fear, Aladdin forced himself still. The cave was not closing in. The air remained breathable. Somewhere around him, the faint glow he had noticed before persisted, low and intermittent, enough at last to outline ledges and pillars and the scattered chill shine of treasure. He found the lamp again and drew it to his chest. Its plainness steadied him. It had been the one thing the stranger wanted more than gems, more than obedience, more than the life of a gullible boy. There had to be a reason. Aladdin sat with his back against a stone rise and tried to think, but thought moved strangely underground. It came in circles. His mother would wait for him. Evening would come. She might tell herself he had found work. Then night would deepen. Lamps would go out lane by lane. Her waiting would sharpen. The image cut him. He lowered his head over the lamp and spoke as much to silence as to metal. I only wanted a chance, he whispered. The words went outward, struck stone, and returned smaller than before. He rubbed at the lamp unconsciously with the heel of his hand, as someone might rub a worry smooth from wood or cloth. The metal warmed. He paused, then rubbed again, more from habit than decision. This time, the warmth deepened quickly. A low sound spread through the cavern, not like rock shifting, but like a voice preparing itself far below hearing. Light stirred in the chamber, not from wall or jewel, but from the lamp itself. A thin line of smoke rose and did not disperse. It climbed, folded, thickened, turned upon itself. Aladdin backed up until his shoulders met stone. The smoke swelled into shape, but not abruptly. It took its time, as though remembering how to become visible. A brow first, immense and dark at the edges, eyes kindled like coals beneath banked ash. Then shoulders, arms, a chest wider than any doorway Aladdin had ever known, and below all that a body still trailing into smoke, impossible to measure because it never entirely finished becoming. The cavern had felt large before. Now it felt appropriately large. The figure's voice, when it came, filled more than the air. It seemed to enter bone and memory alike. Who calls me? Aladdin could not answer immediately. He had not called, or if he had done so by accident, by desperation, by the human need to make some sound in darkness and hope the darkness replies. I did not mean to, he said at last. The figure studied him, and in that study there was not cruelty nor tenderness, but an old appraisal shaped by laws older than compassion. You hold the lamp by the lamp, I answer. The words settled around them like a structure. I serve the bearer, the figure said. The sentence should have sounded triumphant. Instead, it sounded heavy with ancient obligation. Aladdin stared, fear slowly making room for something else. Not confidence yet, not trust, something narrower and more immediate. If that is true, he said, then take me out, take me back to the sky. The coals of the being's eyes brightened, as though in approval of simplicity. So it shall be, smoke surged. Stone answered. Above them, the sealed earth began to move. Light after underground dark is never simple. It arrives not only through the eyes, but through the whole body. And for a moment, Aladdin thought the reopened shaft was pouring fire rather than sunlight into the cave. He climbed with scraped hands and shaking legs, and when he broke into open air, at last he lay flat on the ground, as though the earth above might close again if he stood too quickly. Wind crossed his face. He could smell sun-warmed stone, distant dry grass, and the faint bitterness of his own sweat. He laughed once, sharply, with disbelief, and then the laugh dissolved into something nearer tears. The stranger was gone. No footprint remained sharp enough to trust. No voice answered, only the wide sky and the opened land. Aladdin remained there for a long while. One arm curved around the lamp, as if it were both miracle and proof. When at last he rose and turned toward the city, he did so changed in a way not yet visible to anyone else. There is a particular difference between surviving danger and having the shape of your world altered by it. The road back seemed both familiar and farther than before. Each step carried him away from the place where trust had been buried and toward the life that still expected him. By the time he reached the alleys and market calls of the city, evening had begun to soften the worst of the day's heat. His mother's relief when she saw him was so immediate that it made all explanation feel crude. She touched his face, his shoulders, his hands, as if checking not only for injury, but for reality. He said little, How could he speak of a cavern that glowed from within, of a man who had claimed kinship and sealed him underground, of smoke that formed a being older than kings? The lamp remained hidden beneath cloth in the corner of their room, yet Aladdin felt its presence the way one feels a second heartbeat in the silence before sleep. He did not touch it again that first night, not because he doubted what had happened, but because he believed it too thoroughly. A person who has lived without power has no natural pace for approaching it. It can feel at once like rescue and temptation. The next day passed in a kind of watchfulness. His mother spoke often of gratitude for his return and of caution toward strangers, as though she sensed an incomplete truth and hoped to encircle it with ordinary wisdom. Aladdin helped where he could, though his mind drifted. The room seemed smaller than ever now, not because he despised it, but because he had seen what hidden things the world might contain. That evening, hunger returned, ordinary and familiar. Their bread was stale, the lentils thin. His mother tried not to show disappointment. That effort, more than the poverty itself, moved him. After she slept, her breathing at last even in the corner, Aladdin took out the lamp. Its surface looked almost mockingly dull in the small light. Nothing about it suggested caverns parting or giant forms made of smoke. He ran his thumb along its side. Warmth answered at once, as if no time had passed between one summoning and the next. This time he did not drop it. He waited. Smoke rose more readily, more knowingly, and filled the room without crowding it. An impossible courtesy for something so immense. The being bent itself into the space with an ease that implied it could shape its presence according to need. "You call," it said, the same old weight, the same measured force. Aladdin's fear had not vanished, but now it stood alongside curiosity and something more difficult, moral hesitation. He could ask for anything. That was the terrifying part. Anyone who has gone hungry knows how quickly the mind can fill with possibilities when presented with abundance. Yet when he thought of asking for gold, or silk, or display, his mother's hands came to mind before any palace did. Her tired shoulders, her way of counting food twice without seeming to count it at all. "I want us to be safe," he said slowly. "Not grand, not envied, just safe, enough to live without fear of the next day." The being listened without interruption. Then it said something Aladdin would remember long after the magic was gone. "Speak carefully. Power obeys words, but consequence listens too." Aladdin repeated himself more clearly. He wanted warmth, food, shelter, steadiness, no one's harm. No theft from another table, only enough. Light moved through the room like dawn accelerated. The cracked plaster brightened, the floor widened, a fine cloth curtain drifted where their ragged hanging had been. A low table appeared set with bread still fragrant from heat, figs split open, dates dark and glossy, rice steamed with saffron, and a bowl of cool water, reflecting the lamp flame in a trembling gold line. Chests stood against the far wall. His mother woke, sat up in alarm, then stared around her with such stunned stillness that Aladdin felt both joy and shame in the same breath. Joy because her face, for once, was not braced against tomorrow. Shame because he had hidden this power from her, and because, already, he could sense how easy it would become to answer every ache with the lamp before learning what each answer changed. When she embraced him and whispered blessings into his shoulder, he held her carefully, looking over her back at the diminishing smoke. The being's last words before vanishing were not congratulation. "Use what comes lightly," it said. "Nothing given this easily remains untouched by the giver." Then the room was small again, only in proportion, not in poverty. And Aladdin, though grateful, understood that safety had become only the first circle around a much deeper fire. Comfort settled quickly into habit, which is one reason comfort can be so dangerous to the unprepared. Within days, the new house felt less miraculous than natural. Though Aladdin never entirely lost the jolt of gratitude, that came when he saw his mother sit without immediately reaching for work. She moved more softly now, as if her body had been granted permission to remember ease. She smiled more often, and for longer, neighbors noticed. Of course, in poor quarters, no change remains private. People paused at their doorway. Some looked pleased, some curious, some suspicious. Aladdin learned almost at once that misfortune isolates, but improvement draws scrutiny. At first he answered lightly, a good turn, a blessing, unexpected assistance. The city had always enjoyed explanation almost as much as gossip, and if he gave it too little of one, it would produce its own. Yet none of that mattered as much as the feeling that had begun to return at night, that old widening inward space now sharpened by the fact that he possessed an actual means of transformation. Safety had not extinguished longing. It had merely revealed how many kinds of longing there were. One afternoon, moving through the market under a calmer sun than the one that had burned on the day he met the stranger, Aladdin saw someone who changed the tilt of all his thought. She moved with attendants, yes, and fine cloth, and the subtle clearing of space that follows rain. But what caught him was not splendor alone. It was composure. Her presence seemed to soften the noise around her, rather than feeding on it. Her gaze moved outward with attention, rather than entitlement. She paused once, near a fountain basin set against a wall, and as she turned her head, the light touched her face in such a way that the whole lane seemed briefly organized around that gesture. Later he learned what he had half guessed at once. She was the princess, daughter of the ruler, one of those figures whose life had always seemed to belong to a sealed height in the city's imagination. But in the first moment, she was simply a person whose existence widened the world again. Beauty alone would not have troubled him so deeply. Beauty can be admired at a distance. What troubled him was the feeling that she belonged to the very scale of life he had always sensed but never reached. He went home, restless. The lamp waited in its quiet place. He sat with it a long while before touching it, not because the wish formed slowly, but because he understood enough now to fear the speed with which wishes might answer. He did not want jewels to throw at a palace gate. He did not want costumes empty of substance. He wanted something harder to ask for and harder, perhaps, to receive. Worthiness, recognition, a place in the sight of others that was not built on dismissal. When the being emerged again from smoke and heat, its ancient face seemed almost unsurprised. Desire has changed shape, it said. Aladdin did not deny it. I saw someone today, he answered. Someone who made me understand how far I still stand from the life I imagined. He expected rebuke. Instead, the being only asked what exactly he sought. Here, too, clarity mattered. Aladdin spoke carefully, not love by force, not possession, not to drag another person down to his level by magic. He wanted to stand where he might be seen without contempt. He wanted the city to make room for him, the being considered. If such a being can be said to consider in a human sense, then power moved again, not violently, but with exquisite precision. Fine garments appeared. His bearing, altered not because muscle or bone changed, but because the world began meeting him differently. Merchants looked up when he approached. Guards listened instead of dismissing. Invitations, once unimaginable, arrived through channels he had never entered. This was subtler than food conjured into a poor room, and more dangerous for that very reason. The city had not become kinder, it had become responsive. Responsive people can create the illusion that you have changed more deeply than you have. Aladdin felt the first sweet rush of entering rooms that had not been built for him. He also felt, almost at once, the first tension. Recognition is not the same as belonging. Still, when he caught sight again of the palace walls in evening light, pale and distant above the roofs, the desire to keep moving forward swelled until it was nearly indistinguishable from destiny. The palace did not begin at its gates. It began streets before them, in the change that came over the air as one approached. Noise lowered, not by command, but by architecture. Dust lessened. Stone grew smoother underfoot. Water appeared in channels where poorer quarters knew only cracked basins and shared jars. By the time Aladdin first entered under an invitation shaped by his newly altered standing, he felt as if he had stepped into a different understanding of time. Servants did not rush, though much was being done. Curtains moved with measured grace in cooled corridors. Fountains conversed quietly with marble bowls. Carpets received footsteps and returned almost no sound. It was the kind of place where light itself seemed trained. It arrived filtered through carved screens and high arches, scattered across walls in patterns that changed as the sun moved, but never in any way that felt accidental. Aladdin, who had spent so much of his life in places where need shouted from every corner, found the palace silence almost more difficult than noise. Silence here was not emptiness. It was attention restrained. He became aware of his own breathing, of the angle of his shoulders, of where his hands wished to rest when they had no work to do. Yet the more time he spent there, the more another feeling rose beneath unease. Fascination. He spoke with the princess first in courtyards and garden walks, then under awnings where doves stepped at the edge of sunlight, then in halls where music drifted from somewhere unseen. She was not what he had feared, nor what he had simplistically hoped. She was not only kind, though she could be kind, she was observant. Her questions rarely touched the surface first. What did he value when no one watched? What did he think made a city strong? What kind of life was worth building, not merely inheriting? At first, Aladdin answered cautiously, aware that every word moved across a gap between origin and appearance. But she listened in a way that made deceit feel clumsy. Near her, he discovered something more frightening than exposure to nobility, exposure to sincerity. He wanted her to admire him, yes, but even more, he wanted to deserve the attention she gave. This was where the lamp became complicated in earnest. Each new step upward in the city's regard made access easier, yet it also widened the split between the self he inhabited and the self he presented. When he returned at night to the transformed house, his mother sometimes watched him in that quiet way mothers do when they sense a weather change in a beloved face. "You walk as if carrying an invisible weight," she said once, while folding a new cloth with careful fingertips, still not quite trusting fine things to belong to her. Aladdin smiled and denied it gently, but the truth of her observation stayed with him. Later, alone, he summoned the being again. "I want to stand in the palace without feeling as though everything I touch depends on borrowed permission," he said. The being's answer came slowly. "There is a difference between being admitted and being unquestioned." Aladdin heard the warning and yet moved toward the temptation anyway. "Make me worthy in their eyes," he asked. "Give me a station they cannot dismiss." Power answered. News of his standing spread more fully through the city. Ceremonies widened around him. He was received with deference that bordered on expectation. This was the high-polished side of wishing. The side storytellers often prefer because it gleams. But gleam has its own coldness. The higher he was lifted, the more carefully others watched for flaws. The palace doors opened farther, yes, but behind every courtesy stood appraisal. The princess, for her part, seemed less impressed by rank than before. If anything, the new grandeur made her watch him more closely, as though trying to determine whether the man beneath the polish remained intact. In the mirror, one night, Aladdin studied his own reflection and had the strange sensation of seeing a life that was almost his. The clothes fit, the face was his. The posture was more assured, yet the space inside his eyes seemed occupied by someone still looking out from the alley, still measuring the distance between appearance and truth. Borrowed splendor, he began to understand, is not merely unstable because it can be taken. It is unstable because it requires constant inward negotiation from the one who wears it. Still, he did not step away. Desire had grown roots now, not only in his heart, but in his habits, his hopes, the very pattern of days that moved between palace and home, between quiet conversations and public recognition. And because he did not step away, the shadow he had once escaped found time to return. Celebration has a sound of its own, and for a while the city made that sound everywhere Aladdin went. Musicians appeared near fountains, merchants bowed more deeply, lanterns seemed brighter at thresholds that once had barely registered his passing. People like to attach themselves to a scent. It lets them believe the world is more open than it often is. Yet beneath the festival tone that seemed to rise around his name, Aladdin felt an undertow of unease. It came most strongly when he touched the lamp. What had once felt like possibility now also felt like a question. The being had never lied to him. It had served, but its warnings had become clearer as his wishes grew more refined. Safety had been simple. Recognition was not. Near the princess, he found himself wanting not just to be seen, but to be true under sight. That desire could not be granted as easily as wealth. One evening, beneath arches washed in moonlight, she said to him, "Not unkindly, you seem most distant when others praise you most." The remark entered him like a key finding the right lock. He might have deflected it. Instead, he carried it home, where it joined the rest of his private unease. That same night, another figure entered the city by forgotten ways. The magician, stripped now of pretense and sustained by a rage made patient through time, did not return grandly. He returned cleverly. Power lost by force is often pursued through disguise. He moved among common lanes with a cracked trader's call, offering new lamps for old useless metal for dull household scraps. The genius of the deception lay in its smallness. No guard prepares for catastrophe in the voice of a peddler. No palace expects ruin to enter through the category of jump. When the call floated faintly into a courtyard and reached ears that had no reason to attach significance to a neglected object, the trap closed almost invisibly. The old lamp, set aside among things no one valued by appearance, was exchanged. Fingers closed around it. The magician felt the old answer in the metal at once. Triumph did not need to shout. It only needed to keep moving. By the time Aladdin sensed absence, the world had already shifted. He went, almost without thinking, to the place where the lamp should have rested hidden. His hand found emptiness. In the same breath, the air changed. Silence thickened, then split with a sound too large for any ordinary city night. The palace did not crumble. It was worse than that. It was taken whole. Towers, halls, courtyards, fountains, rooms of silk and quiet order. All of it torn free from its foundations in a storm of force no human wall could resist. The city witnessed the impossible. Wind rushed, light flared. Then, where a palace had stood, there remained only an emptiness so stark it seemed to hum. Aladdin stood inside that absence, as if his own life had been excised around him. The princess was gone. The place where he had become someone in the city's eyes was gone. The structure in which his borrowed belonging had found its stage was gone. Grief and shame arrived together. He fell to his knees not because the body always yields under sorrow, but because some recognitions are too total to take standing. Everything that had rested upon the lamp's hidden power had been revealed as fragile in a single turn. Yet the most piercing knowledge was not that he had lost magnificence. It was that someone he cared for had been swept away as part of the loss. There are moments when a life divides more sharply than language can manage. Before the cave, and after, it had been one such division. This was another. He remained on the empty ground until the sky paled toward dawn. People watched from a distance, unsure whether to approach him as victim, as culprit, or as symbol. At last, he rose. His hands were empty. No command remained. No smoke would answer a touch. What remained was choice stripped of assistance. He went first to his mother and told her only what she needed to know: that he must leave, that he must try to set right what had been broken, that he could no longer rely on the means by which he had risen. She wept softly, then steadied. Sometimes mothers recognize growth in the very moment it costs them most. "Go as yourself," she said, "not as what the city called you." Those words joined the princess's remark and the being's warnings inside him. Before dawn fully bloomed, Aladdin stepped beyond the city once more. But unlike the first journey, he went now without a guide, without a false promise at his side, and without the cushion of magic before him. The road would ask different things of him. That was precisely why he had to take it. Without magic, the world regained weight. That was the first truth of the road. Distance became distance again, instead of a space to be leapt by desire. Hunger returned, but in a form almost clarifying, wind-chilled, sun-burned. Shoes wore thin. Sleep came not in chambers softened by lamps and layered cloth, but under open sky, against roots, beside low fires, beneath awnings shared with strangers, who neither knew nor cared what title the city had last placed near his name. And yet this new hardship did not mirror the old one exactly. Poverty lived differently when one no longer believed it to be the whole map of one's being. The old lack had narrowed him because he had not yet seen beyond it. This lack, entered by choice, widened him. The road stripped away the forms that had attached themselves to him in the city. Processions did not follow. No servant announced him. No rumor ran ahead. He had only his body, his persistence, the memory of what had been lost, and the quiet necessity of moving forward. At first, anger carried him. Anger at deception repeated. Anger at the magician. Anger at himself for allowing a neglected object to remain neglected, as though power could ever safely be hidden in a corner and forgotten. But anger is a poor long-distance companion. It eats more than it sustains. After several days, when his feet blistered and the horizon changed very little from hour to hour, anger settled into something slower and stronger. Resolve. This was when the road began giving back, not in comfort, but in human measure. A traveler sitting beneath the skeleton shade of a stunted tree shared water without asking a lineage. A shepherd woman with dust on her hem and a voice like weathered wood broke her bread in half and pressed one portion into his hand before speaking a word. An old man by a low fire listened to part of Aladdin's story and did not interrupt to moralize. When Aladdin finished, the man only said that the hardest road is the one that asks who you are when nothing around you reflects your importance back to you. Then he fed the fire a small stick and let silence do the rest. These encounters entered Aladdin more deeply than ceremony ever had. They were simple, but simplicity was precisely their force. Here was water not because of rank, but because thirst is recognizable. Here was bread not because of display, but because hunger is common ground. Here was speech that neither flattered nor condemned, only witnessed. By night, beneath stars no palace roof interrupted, Aladdin found his thoughts returning less often to the splendor he had lost, and more often to the shape he wished to carry into whatever came next. He thought of the princess, yes, but not only as someone to rescue. He thought of the steadiness in her eyes, the kind of truth she drew from others by the mere fact of remaining attentive. He wished to stand before that gaze again, without needing the lamp to support him. He thought, too, of the being in the smoke, and of the strange justice in its warnings. Power had obeyed him, but not blindly. Consequence had indeed listened. Somewhere along the road, he understood that the lamp's deepest lesson had never been abundance. It had been exposure. Wishes reveal the shape of the one who makes them. This realization did not make his path easier, but it made it cleaner. By the time rumors reached him of an impossible palace risen in a distant land, He was no longer walking toward it as the boy who had once peered into the cave, trembling with desire. He was walking toward it as someone who had begun to trust a different resource altogether, the capacity to continue without enchantment. That change felt quiet from the inside. From the outside, it might have looked like nothing more than a tired young man moving steadily through dust. But inner changes often wear humble faces. When at last he saw the stolen palace on the horizon, gleaming where no city should have stood, he did not feel the old dazzled longing. He felt sorrow, anger, and beneath them a clean readiness. The palace looked wrong there, too bright against that landscape, like something uprooted and forced to grow in foreign stone. Magic can relocate walls more easily than belonging. Aladdin knew that now. He approached openly. Guards stopped him. He did not lie. He did not invent titles or summon splendor. The words carried farther than a performance might have. That was another lesson of the road. Simplicity, when earned, can unsettle false certainty more than grandeur ever could. The hall in which he finally stood before the magician was a hall taught to imitate power. It contained the outward signs: height, polished surfaces, controlled light, guards at exact intervals, carpets that swallowed sound, a seat placed to dominate the room. But something in it remained strained, as though its magnificence were being held in place by force rather than by inheritance, patience, and use. The magician reclined with the lamp near his hand and wore triumph like a garment not yet broken in. Near him, the princess stood composed, and though worry shadowed her face, fear had not hollowed it. When her eyes met Aladdin's, a different kind of strength moved between them. Not the dazzled bond of a wish fulfilled, but recognition sharpened by hardship. The magician spoke first. He mocked the absence of retinue and illusion. He called Aladdin a boy returned to beg from power he could no longer command. Yet even in the mockery, there ran a fine thread of strain. The lamp had obeyed him enough to steal, enough to move walls across the world, enough to sustain spectacle. But possession and mastery are not identical, and somewhere in his voice, Aladdin heard that distinction beginning to crack. He answered quietly. He said he had not come to seize what could not truly be kept by force. He had come to end what theft had prolonged. The magician laughed at the language of ending. Men who worship control often imagine every conflict as a contest over who commands more. He raised the lamp, rubbed it with aggressive certainty, and spoke an order sharpened to destroy. Smoke answered in a rush darker than before, thickening fast, and the great figure rose between them. Yet even before it fully formed, the hall seemed to listen differently than the cave had done, and differently than Aladdin's poor room had done. There was hesitation in the air, not from weakness, but from discernment. The being's ancient gaze moved first to the magician, then to Aladdin, and finally to the princess, as if measuring not volume of command but moral gravity. Destroy him, the magician said. Remove him, the old hall, the guards, the polished seat, the stolen palace in foreign land, all of it waited on the sentence. Aladdin did not step back. He did not answer with a demand for equal force. That was the essential change in him. Power no longer defined the available shape of action. I ask no destruction, he said. I ask release. The word altered the room. Release from what? Asked the being, and its voice rolled through the hall like distant thunder heard through stone. Release from fear mistaken for mastery, Aladdin answered. Release from a bargain that has been bent toward cruelty. Release for this house, for those held inside it, and for the power itself from serving the worst wish in the room. The magician shouted over him, trying to reclaim the center by sheer force of will. But the more he commanded, the less inevitable his command seemed. Aladdin understood then something the road had prepared him to know. The being in the lamp answered not only ownership, but clarity. Fear wants possession, greed wants extension, pride wants display, but clarity can want an ending. The lamp in the magician's hand began to glow with a heat that looked less like obedience than resistance. He flinched. He tightened his grip. The being's eyes burned brighter, bound. "Yes," it said, "but not to blindness." The sentence fell with enormous quiet. In that quiet, Aladdin saw the path before him as plainly as if it had been laid in light. He could ask for the lamp back. He could ask for greater mastery than the magician had shown. He could secure himself forever against lack, against humiliation, against uncertainty. It was all there within reach, and because it was within reach, refusal acquired its full moral weight. "I choose an end," he said, "not another bearer, not another chain. End the bond." For a moment the hall itself seemed to draw breath. The being's vast form trembled at the edges, like flame under wind. Ancient rules strained, then light burst outward, not as violence, but as release long delayed. The palace shuddered. The magician cried out and dropped the lamp. Smoke surged, thinned, and rose upward, as if returning to a height no architecture could contain. When the brightness faded, the lamp lay dull on the floor. Empty, ordinary, final, the magician, robbed, now, not only of power, but of the confidence that had hidden his smallness from himself, collapsed into the measure of a man whose authority had depended entirely upon borrowed force. Guards approached him without terror. The princess stepped toward Aladdin. No one in the hall rushed to fill the silence that followed, because some silences deserve to remain unbroken long enough to be felt. Aladdin looked down at the lamp. It seemed lighter than before, almost weightless. He could have picked it up and mourned the loss of miracles. Instead, he felt something nearer gratitude, though grief and fatigue remained beside it. Letting go had not diminished him. It had returned him to proportion. That was the true miracle, perhaps the only one durable enough to trust. Afterward, the palace breathed differently. That was the first thing he noticed once the immediate danger had passed, and the hall no longer held itself in a posture of strain. Windows admitted ordinary light. The air smelled of stone, oil, and distant gardens, rather than power compressed to the point of distortion. Servants moved again, as human beings move after fear has loosened its hand. The princess stood beside Aladdin in the open court for a long while, before either of them spoke. Below, the city of that foreign land continued in its own patterns, unaware of how close it had come to living under a magic sharpened beyond mercy. When she finally turned to him, there was no ceremonial gratitude in her face, no inclination to place him above measure. There was instead the steadiness he had first recognized in her, now joined by a clearer warmth. "You came without the thing that first raised you," she said. He nodded. "I had to know whether anything real remained when it was gone." "And?" she asked. He looked at his empty hands, then out over the roofs beyond the court. "Enough remained," he said. "Not certainty, but enough." In time they returned. Not to a city restored to the exact shape it had been before, for no life returns to its previous arrangement once it has been remade by loss and choice, but to a city capable of receiving them without enchantment. Aladdin went first to his mother. She held him a long while, not asking for the whole account immediately, as if sensing that the deepest parts of some journeys must settle before they can be spoken. When he did speak, he told her less about spectacles than about decision, less about what smoke could do than about what it had demanded of him to refuse it. She listened with the grave attention of someone who understands that adulthood sometimes arrives not through age, but through renunciation. The lamp he kept, though it now answered nothing. He placed it in a quiet part of the house where evening light touched it briefly, and then moved on. Not as a relic of lost grandeur, as a reminder. Some objects stop being useful in the ordinary sense and become truer for that very reason. He worked. That mattered. He learned the city anew, this time not as a dreamer gazing upward from an alley, and not as a figure wrapped in borrowed rain, but as someone who could move between worlds without mistaking either poverty or privilege for identity. People trusted him more slowly now, which was proper. Trust built without magic takes longer and holds better. He listened in councils when councils invited him. He walked markets without needing them to worship his name. He stood beside the princess, not as an invention conjured into worthiness, but as a man who had passed through desire, power, collapse, and the long road afterward. Some nights, when the city dimmed and one lantern after another appeared over roofs and doorways, he would sit by the window and look at the lamp in the quiet. He no longer wondered what else he might have asked of it. That question belonged to an earlier self. Instead, he sometimes traced with his eye the dull curve of its side and thought how strange it was that the object which once seemed to promise the whole world had finally given him something much smaller and much larger at once. A true scale for his own life. Not invincibility, not endless ascent, only this understanding that a person can be lifted by marvel and still need to learn how to stand. That wishes can decorate desire, but cannot replace discernment, and that the strongest future is the one made not by forcing the world to bend, but by meeting it steadily with courage, patience, and a heart no longer dazzled by its own hunger. If you imagine him then, do not imagine a king in a hall of glittering exaggeration. Imagine instead a man in the blue quiet of evening, city sounds thinning below, a lamp gone ordinary on the shelf, a mother at rest in the next room, and somewhere nearby the woman whose gaze had always asked for truth more than splendor. Imagine the air cooling after heat, the last merchant voice fading, the long road behind him and other roads still ahead. The story does not need to close harder than that. It can rest there, in the human afterglow of wonder. It can leave a little space for sleep, because the greatest magic, in the end, was not that smoke answered him when he called. It was that he learned how to walk forward when no magic answered at all. And if the city grows quiet enough, if the lamps burn low and the night softens every edge, that final lesson can remain in the air like the last warmth left in stone, after sunset faint, steady, and sufficient until morning. In the weeks that followed the first wishes, Aladdin discovered that magic does not merely change surroundings. It changes tempo. Before, each day had been partitioned by need. Find work if there is work. Stretch food if there is little. Wait for evening if the afternoon is too hot. Endure the comments of those who have already decided what kind of person you are. But once the house filled with food and soft cloth and the constant ache of uncertainty loosened, time opened in a new way. He found himself lingering over small things because he could. Morning bread could be eaten while still warm instead of after hours of saving it. His mother could sit with tea and let conversation meander into memory. Light through the window became a thing to notice rather than something one merely happened to stand in. This was beautiful and unsettling. One afternoon, he asked the being, when it appeared from the lamp with its usual grave power, whether all wishes took something even when they seemed kind. The answer did not come immediately. The smoke shifted around the room as if the question deserved a wider shape. Everything taken into a life changes that life, it said. Mortals call some changes gifts because the cost does not arrive at once. Aladdin thought of bread, of rest, of his mother's softened face. Those could not be wrong, could they? The being, which seemed able to follow the line of his thought without his speaking it, said that mercy and indulgence are not the same thing, and that discernment matters most at the point where one begins to confuse relief with entitlement. The distinction settled in him like a stone dropped into deep water. He began to understand that the lamp did not create a separate world called magic. It simply accelerated consequence. Human hearts moved no differently under its influence than they did without it. Desire still widened or narrowed the soul according to its nature. Fear still disguised itself as prudence. Vanity still dressed itself as worthiness. If anything, the lamp made such tendencies visible more quickly. That realization made him more careful, and for a time, more quiet. He walked to the city in the late hours after heat had drained from the walls, and watched how ordinary life continued regardless of private miracles. Bakers still rose before dawn, water carriers still bent under poles, children still played in alleys with games made from almost nothing. A noble procession one day still caused Elaine to pause, then resume. He found, unexpectedly, that he cherished these observations more now that he could have escaped them. The city no longer felt merely like a trap. It felt like a text he had once resented because he had not yet learned how to read it. Even his longing shifted. It grew less fevered and more articulate. He did not simply want more. He began wanting a truer proportion between the life he inhabited and the life he believed possible. That change, small and inward, mattered as much as any jewel the lamp might have poured into his hands. It was what later made palace halls bearable, and later still made the road without magic survivable. But at the time, he knew only that he had become watchful toward his own wishes. And that watchfulness, though it slowed nothing outwardly, was the beginning of a deeper form of freedom. There were nights in the palace quarter when the city seemed divided by sound alone. In the poorer lanes, shutters closed against wind and dust. In the richer streets, music climbed over garden walls and spilled like silk into the dark. Aladdin often paused where one world gave way to the other and listened. He would hear a flute from somewhere unseen, then the clatter of a distant cart, then laughter from behind a carved screen, then the call of someone selling roasted nuts to late wanderers. The whole city existed at once, layered and unequal, and this layering came to trouble him more deeply than before. When he had been excluded from the palace, he had imagined access as cure. But access revealed not only beauty, it revealed system. Wealth did not simply mean cushions, lamps, music, and water shaped into decorative pools. It meant insulation from urgency. It meant having time to speak thoughtfully because no immediate necessity clawed at the edge of every sentence. It meant that one's mistakes were more often softened by distance from consequence. Sitting once with the princess beneath a shaded arcade while evening gathered blue over the courtyard, he heard himself say that the city felt like several different dreams having been built upon the same ground. She answered, after a pause, that power rarely notices its own quiet until someone who has not had it comes close enough to hear the contrast. He looked at her then with renewed attention. It would have been easier if she had been naive, or merely gracious, or content to be admired. Instead, she understood more than comfort had erased. That understanding deepened his affection and his unease at the same time. He longed to speak plainly to her about the lamp, about the cave, about the fact that the distance she witnessed him crossing had been bridged by forces not visible in his face or clothes. But each time he nearly began, fear held him back. Not fear that she would despise him for having used power, though that remained possible. A subtler fear that once spoken, the truth would show him how much of himself still depended on what he had summoned rather than what he had become. So he delayed. Delay is often the way people keep a dangerous balance from tipping before they feel ready, though the balance is already unstable. He told himself that he would speak when his standing was less fragile, when his own understanding was clearer, when one more conversation had passed, when one more step toward legitimacy had been secured. Meanwhile, the lamp remained hidden and quiet, a second architecture beneath the visible one. He could feel it shaping outcomes even when untouched, simply because he knew it existed. Possibility changes conduct, even restraint changes when one knows abundance waits in reserve. Sometimes, after leaving the palace, he would walk home slowly through streets that smelled of rain, trapped in stone, though no rain had fallen, and try to imagine what kind of man he would be if the lamp vanished that night. The question which he first asked as a thought experiment later returned to him as fate. In that earlier time, however, it still felt abstract enough to set aside. He set it aside because desire was easier to inhabit than uncertainty, and because the palace, with its silk hush and its measured splendor, remained terribly difficult to refuse. The road after loss, lengthened in memory, even while it was being walked. Days did not present themselves in any tidy order. They came as heat, then distance, then the sound of sandals or hooves somewhere far off, then a little shelter, then another stretch of land. At times Aladdin spoke almost not at all, saving words because he had no audience for performance, and because silence had become a teacher in its own right. When he did speak with those he met, he noticed how quickly truth can emerge when one no longer has much to defend. He told one caravan keeper only that he was traveling to correct a wrong and had once mistaken borrowed power for earned place. The keeper stirred lentils in a pot blackened by many fires and said that borrowed things can be useful, but they never let you forget that they can be reclaimed. A woman drawing water at a village well asked whether he had family waiting somewhere. He answered that he had a mother and someone else dearer to him than safety. The woman nodded, as though this were enough explanation for 100 miles. A shepherd boy no older than Aladdin had been, when first he learned the language of lack, showed him a shorter path through a stony rise and asked for no coin. These meetings did not turn the road into comfort. They turned it into relation that mattered. There is a great difference between hardship endured in resentment and hardship endured within a field of small human recognition. Each recognition steadied him. It reminded him that the world beyond the lamp had never been empty, only slower. He began to sleep better under open sky than he had slept under carved ceilings, not because the ground was soft, but because his thoughts, though burdened, had become less divided. Near midnight he would sometimes wake and listen to the desert or the high country around him, depending on where the road had carried him that week. Wind over scrub, insects ticking in dry grass, a camel groaning somewhere in complaint, the small knock of firewood settling into ash. In such sounds there is no ambition. They happen because the world continues. He found that continuation soothing. Once he dreamed of the being from the lamp, but in the dream it did not speak. It only stood at the edge of sight while the road unrolled beneath the stars, and its silent presence no longer felt like a threat or a promise. It felt like witness. He woke from that dream with a strange peace and understood that even the memory of power had changed inside him. He no longer wanted to recover the lamp in order to resume the old ascent. He wanted to confront what had been done, yes, and to bring the princess back from a place of imposed enchantment. But more than that, he wanted to ensure that the shape of his life from then onward would not depend on an instrument he had once mistaken for destiny. By the time the unnatural palace rose at last from the far horizon, bright against a land too severe for such architecture, Aladdin had lost much: rank, ease, the illusion of invulnerability, the city's easy admiration. Yet he had gained something far harder to dramatize and far more useful: a center, not certainty, because certainty remains beyond most human lives, but a center around which uncertainty could turn without tearing him apart. That, more than any wish, was what he carried into the final hall. In time, the brightest wonders mattered a little less than they once had. The cave, the smoke, the palace lifted across the world, all remained in memory. Yet another image grew gentler and more lasting. A lamp silent on a shelf, a city settling into evening, a man who has discovered that the ordinary can feel larger after one has ceased demanding that it become miraculous. Aladdin's life, after the lamp, did not empty itself of beauty. In some respects it filled more honestly. He learned how markets change from dawn to noon, and from noon to dusk, when one is not rushing through them under disguise. He learned the names of craftsmen whose labor had once registered to him only as backdrop. He learned which old men in which corners always knew the news first, and which women at which wells could tell by the sound of a person's bucket whether the rope would soon fray. The princess, walking with him sometimes in gardens and sometimes in streets where the smell of bread drifted low and warm from ovens, seemed to value these observations more than any tale of vanished grandeur. She had lived among power long enough to understand how often power dulls perception. With her, he found no need to dramatize his transformation. It was enough to keep showing up in truthful form. His mother, too, became an anchor of proportion. She never dismissed what had happened, but neither did she permit it to become the only language in the house. Bread still had to be cut, cloths still folded, lamps still trimmed. There is great mercy in such practical continuities after large events. They remind the soul that wonder and grief must eventually coexist with daily rhythm, or else consume it. Sometimes visitors would ask to see the famous lamp, and Aladdin would almost smile. Famous now, perhaps in rumor, but to him it had returned to its original dignity, plain, worn, unpersuasive by appearance. He showed it rarely. When he did, people often looked disappointed by how little it resembled their expectation. This, too, pleased him in a quiet way. The truest forces in life are often those least interested in display. On certain evenings, when the sky over the city turned from brass to rose to deep blue, and the first stars appeared between minarets and rooftop line, he would sit by the open window and feel no lack in the absence of answering smoke. The world had not bent, it had remained itself. And because it had remained itself, every human act of kindness, labor, patience, conversation, and chosen loyalty seemed more remarkable than before. This is not the sort of ending that dazzles in one stroke. It is better for sleep than that. It recedes. It leaves a warm line rather than a bright flash. The lamp is quiet, the road is behind him, and still somehow ahead. The city breathes below. Somewhere a musician tries a note and then another. Somewhere a door closes softly. Somewhere tomorrow is already gathering its practical demands. But tonight, the story rests in a gentler place, where power has released its hold and meaning remains. Calm and human, in the life that continues after wonder. Late in the city, long after the market scales had been packed away, and the day's last bargaining had dissolved into memory, Aladdin moved through familiar streets differently now. Not grandly, not with the deliberate slow pace of someone performing importance. If anything, he moved more simply than before, as though he had at last stepped out from beneath several overlapping disguises. He greeted the baker who rose before dawn, and the old woman who sold herbs from a low tray with the same attention he once reserved for courtyards of rank. He stopped when children asked questions, not because he wished to be admired, but because he remembered too clearly what it felt like to live among walls that answered curiosity with silence. The city, in turn, seemed to release him from the role it had once tried to force upon him. Some still liked telling stories about the days of marvel and sudden ascent. Cities enjoy enlarging what passes through them, yet time, which can dull spectacle, often clarifies character. What endured in people's minds was not simply that riches had appeared and vanished, or that a palace had crossed impossible distances, but that Aladdin had walked back from loss without turning cruel, and had stood before power without letting power define the last shape of his heart. Such things are harder to describe, but they travel farther in the end. On especially quiet nights, when the wind came mild from the desert and carried a little coolness into the lanes, he would hear the whole city settling by degrees. A latch set into place, a bowl rinsed and overturned to dry, a far-off cart finally stilled, a bit of laughter from a roof where someone had delayed sleep to enjoy the air. It pleased him that the world could be made of such sounds and need no enchantment to feel complete. He had not outgrown wonder. That was important. He still looked up when the moon climbed large and low over the walls. He still paused at caravans entering at dawn with bells dull from travel dust. He still felt a tremor of imagination when maps were unrolled or distant places named. But wonder had changed its allegiance. It no longer pointed him chiefly toward possession. It pointed him toward attention, toward the patient marvel of how lives join and alter one another. How cities continue through ordinary labor, how love becomes steadier when it is no longer inflated by fantasy, how a person may be offered impossible force and still learn, through trial and tenderness, to place his trust in quieter strength. If there is a final gift in this story, perhaps it is that shift. A lamp that once answered every wish, now answering none. A man once dazzled by the thought of a larger life, discovering that largeness can live inside honesty, service, patience, and the refusal to let fear choose on your behalf. So let the story dim there, let the palace lights go soft, let the road flatten into memory, let the market sleep, the window remain open a little to the night, and the old lamp sit in stillness where no hand reaches for it. Beyond it all, the city is breathing in its sleep as well, and somewhere within that breathing, Aladdin's story becomes what the gentle stories always become at last. Not a shout of triumph, but a warm, receding glow, enough to see by for a moment, and then gentle enough to rest beside until morning. The night can hold it now without strain,